I'm about to share with you in this video is one of the most potent tools in my arsenal, and it can become also the most potent tool for your personal, professional, and spiritual transformation. Today, we're talking about ancestral healing, and you are going to learn how events that happened to your ancestors that you may not even be aware of can be affecting you today. But beyond that, you're going to learn what to do about it, how to avoid common pitfalls that people fall into when they try to break ancestral patterns. And you are going to learn the exact process that I use with my clients to bring transformation and healing, not just to yourself, but to your entire family line, including your descendants.
Welcome to the Architects of Destiny podcast, where we bring together wisdom from galactic star nations, as well as very down-to-earth practical insights to accelerate your energetic mastery and spiritual growth trajectory. Tune in to receive the energetic tools you need to step into your divine role as an architect of destiny, to create the life of your desires and co-create the new earth that we can all be proud of.
When people think about ancestral healing, sometimes what springs to mind is some kind of strange, mysterious rituals that we could do to speak to our ancestors. Maybe you have in mind some mediumship practices, but it's not exactly what is needed. So before I explain to you what ancestral healing is, I want to assure you that no matter what level of skills you have, whether you are very psychically attuned or not, you can use ancestral healing today after this video to start releasing certain ancestral patterns, because all you need is a little bit of sensitivity, a little bit of common sense, and your Sherlock Holmes investigative cap on. So get ready and let's start to explain what this whole ancestral healing is about. So when I talk about ancestral healing, I usually use the word ancestral patterns instead. And let me explain why. Because how the energetic reality works is that things repeat in predictable patterns. So sometimes maybe thinking that it's just random events just happening. Also in the Western society, we think that every decision is driven by just our conscious mind, and everything we do is so, straightforward and aware. But in reality, there are usually bigger forces that are at play, and certain energetic patterns influence our subconscious mind to bring us to make certain decisions. And this is exactly where ancestral healing comes to play, because ancestral healing is a process of liberating energy so that you can start making your own sovereign choices and you are not doomed to repeat family history. And we all know that to a degree, history tends to repeat itself in the family. We even have common sayings such as the apple doesn't fall far from the tree to indicate that we follow the footsteps of our ancestors. But whilst we all agree that we can, inherit certain personality traits and of course certain physical traits, we believe often that our behavior is completely independent and nothing to do with our ancestors. Well, actually, if we look at how many of our decisions are driven by those ancestral patterns, we will be absolutely amazed. So basically, what can happen is that your personal energetic field and your subconscious mind will be interacting with this greater ancestral field, and subconsciously you'll be making choices, bigger or smaller, that are familiar to this field, that are basically driven by what is known, what has always been, rather than going for perhaps what serves you best. And how ancestral patterns work is that there will usually be some energetically charged up event that has happened in your family line that creates ripples going through the generations. And of course, certain ripples from some dramatic event are pretty acute and we know them in the physical reality. But what we tend to forget is that those ripples continue energetically and influence the future generations in more subtle ways. And let me give you an example. So if your ancestor perhaps lost something in some war, there was a loss of property, or perhaps there was some government confiscation going on because of some political change, you may not even remember that because this may have happened in the times of your great-grandfather. But what may be happening in your reality is that you have some unexplained fear of losing your money or unexplained fear of authorities. And there's nothing that happened in your life to justify it, yet it sits somewhere there and perhaps stops you from making decisions that would actually work in your highest good. And this is just a simple example. Sometimes those ancestral patterns weave in less linear way, but this is how ancestral history can affect your day to day. And the process of ancestral healing ancestral trauma, is a process of unpicking those patterns and transmuting them in a way that will serve not just you, but also any future generations. So how do we do that? Well, it starts with acknowledgement, because there is a tendency of breaking ancestral patterns. So let's say your ancestors were always employees and they were literally on the breadline working in some low-paid jobs, and you're like, this is completely not for me. I'm going for abundance. I'm going to open my own business and it's going to be, I'm going to rewrite the history. If you do it like that, you would have broken an ancestral pattern. So you haven't released it, you've just broken it. It's like the equivalent energetically of sticking, the middle finger in your ancestor's face and say, you're wrong, I'm right, I'm just going for my own. And a lot of personal development approach is unfortunately this approach. And let me tell you what the energetic consequences of breaking patterns without acknowledging are. Your energy field literally goes crazy. Things start happening to put you back into this trajectory that's been set by your ancestry field. You may be experiencing things like lost objects, bank accounts that get hacked, setbacks and niggles, because the ancestry field is trying to get your attention to acknowledge that. And when I say acknowledge, I mean to actually pay respect to your ancestors, even though you perhaps are choosing a totally different approach. Because what you've got to understand is that your ancestors only knew what they knew. And perhaps they had limited knowledge, limited tools available. So us being, aggressive with it does not honor them. And ancestral field and patterns really work with acknowledgement. So in this particular scenario, you try to start your own business rather than be an employee like your ancestors. The correct approach would be to pay honor to the fact that those ancestors working in perhaps quite low-paid jobs over the generations were actually bringing the food to the table and keeping the roof over the heads of the children and families. And for that, they deserve respect. However, you, as a sovereign being, don't want to follow these footsteps. So as a sovereign energetic being, you are choosing to go your own way. And simple mind-to-mind communication with your ancestral field, a little bit like telepathy, it all happens in your imagination, will be enough to settle this field down and to allow you to go for your own, however, with a full acknowledgement of everything that your ancestors have been through. And obviously here we don't even have any trauma situation because, ancestral patterns are more than just patterns of trauma. Sometimes it's just set ways of behavior that have been followed generation after generation, and that basically will follow in the next generations onwards unless we change something. So when we are dealing with ancestral patterns, what you've got to remember is the rule of acknowledgement and respect. And this becomes even more important when we're working with an actual trauma situation. And let me explain why. I'll give you an example of my own family life. My great-grandmother lost a 3-month-old baby. And this situation have rippled across the generations to actually bring quite an interesting and intricate pattern. And what happened was she was so upset having experienced that loss. It happened literally right after the Second World War. She also lost her husband at war. So she was a single mom back in Poland in the 1940s with 2 kids that were small and teenage, and then another baby that was lost. She had no support network. And, there was no tools available. There was no therapy. There was nothing. She just had to actually, rather than grieve that loss, she had to deal with it on her own and get on with her life and make sure that she provides for the other children. So there was never time to heal it. And yet that pain persisted over the generations. And what happened is it transmuted in such a way that she started believing that she cannot be trusted, especially since she was like a village healer. She was helping other children. She was nursing others back to health, but she could not save her own child. And that has begun a pattern of, I cannot trust myself and I cannot be trusted with things in the house, in the household. That has gone so far that across 4 generations, so my great-grandmother, my grandmother, my mom, up until me, there was a pattern of losing things, losing possessions around the house, misplacing stuff, always looking for things like keys, wallets, complete kind of confusion. And what that rooted back into was that initial loss back in the 1940s. But going further, this pattern of loss has then resulted in a loss of mind because my great-grandmother developed dementia. So did my grandmother, whereas myself and my mum, we were born with ADHD, which also causes a lot of confusion and not like a linear operating system. So this is an example of how this ripple goes. And this is also a reminder for you that when you're dealing with a situation of something inherited, you have to deal with utmost respect, remembering that your ancestors most likely did not have tools that you may have access to today. My great-grandmother didn't have, therapists and support network and helpline or anything like that. She had to deal with it on your own. And I'm sure that your grandfathers, grandmothers dealt with different traumatic situations that they also did not have tools to resolve. It could have been war, it could have been famine, it could have been repossession, it could have been even murder or some violent occurrence that literally could not be resolved because times were different. Today, We are a bit more evolved. We know how to go inwards. We've got psychologists, psychiatrists. We've got various tools available. They did not. And this is why when you are threading with ancestral patterns, you have to tread carefully. So what you've got to do in order to do ancestral healing is to first acknowledge just how tough they had it. And this is literally the very basic foundation of any ancestral healing. You find the root cause of what happened and you pay your dues to your ancestors for what they have been through and what they could not receive help with. When you do that, then the next stage is you can release the pattern and start a new pattern that serves you. However, remember, don't break the pattern. First acknowledge, release, and then move on. So this is basically how you do the ancestral healing. You find the pattern, you acknowledge the pattern, and you release and move on. Well, the most difficult part of this whole process is actually not the process of, paying respect or acknowledging. That's the simple part. The most difficult part of ancestral healing is to actually get to the root cause of what is causing a particular situation. So like in this example with my great-grandmother, for a number of years, I had no idea. I was just calling myself scatterbrained. I didn't even have the ADHD diagnosis. It only happened after I've discovered the pattern. And then it started making sense. But for years, I was just beating myself up for being scatterbrained. And my mom was doing the same. My grandmother was doing the same. We did not see it until when I was starting to open up spiritually, myself and my mom kept getting the same dream about being lost, about being at the airport, losing the grip of all our stuff, trying to stuff our suitcases. And we started talking to one another. And it was like, oh, the ancestral field is speaking now. Something is happening. There's something there. There must be some root cause of this. And then we started digging and started thinking, okay, what is causing that? So when you are doing your ancestral healing, it's a case of actually looking the very tip of the iceberg and trying to see what's underneath and what is the root. It's an investigative, introspective work whereby you see what is limiting you today. You see perhaps patterns in your relationships. Maybe you're attracting a specific type of partner. Patterns within your finances. Maybe you keep coming across similar situation over and over again. And then you try to find whether the cause of it goes beyond you, whether there was anything in your parents' life, your grandparents' life. And this is how you actually have to do it. So the most difficult part of ancestral healing is understanding how these patterns are weaved and how they go down, 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 and what is the very root cause. And that takes some thinking, that takes asking some questions, but you can also help your ancestors to be more available for you during this process and to be more ready to offer the kind of advice. By that, I mean with telepathic communication, thoughts, memories, impressions. And I would really, really be very mindful of these little intuitions you're getting. And the more you do it, the easier it becomes. But at the beginning, sometimes you may need a little bit of help with seeing how things run. And then you have these aha moments. That's what we do during our individual client session, myself and my husband Aaron, when we do this investigative work, and then there is like a light bulb moment. And after you've done a few things like that with someone, you usually then start spotting those patterns left, right, and center. And there will come a point where you will be almost like, oh my goodness me, another pattern, and it becomes easy. It's just a matter of practice. The more you start spotting it, the more you will be able to kind of release it, move on, and then the next layer will become available. Just so you know, I have also recorded light language for ancestral healing, which I'll be linking onto this podcast episode. So if you are struggling to have these intuitions, to have these insights into what could be the root cause of the problem, you can maybe use this tool, this light language, which will try to coax out and strengthen this relationship between you and the generations before you, so you can intuitively be understanding what is the root cause of certain things that are repeating in your family line up until today.
When we actually move into this new earth, it's going to be a completely different way of living. It's always darkest before the dawn. Love and hope are one of the strongest frequencies there are. You came here for much more than this. The biggest blessing ever. It's just incredible, but we need to go through a change because we've all been born into this system. Imagine your life which is completely loved. Imagine your life which is creative. Imagine a life which is completely guided. Imagine your life creating through flow, which is completely abundant on every level. Imagine a life which is joyful, radiant, healthy, and exciting.
Ancestral healing may seem a bit daunting at the beginning because it's not the exact science. But the more you do it, the easier it will become. And what's really important is that the benefits of actually healing your ancestral trauma, spotting these patterns, are tremendous. Not only the energy will start to shift nearly immediately. So, for example, if you had a stubborn pattern of not being able to make a certain amount of money because this was the cap that your ancestors were always capped at, you will do the ancestral healing. You will find why there was this cap, what's the reason, or why you are attracting that kind of situation, and straight away things will start to move. Forget manifestation. This thing literally will be your best tool that you will start using to see reality shift immediately. But there are other benefits. One of the biggest ones is that when you're doing this ancestral healing work, this is the best inheritance you can give to your children, the energetic inheritance, because those patterns that were perhaps dysfunctional will stop with you today. They will not ripple out to your children, especially if your children are underaged. If they're already adults and those patterns cause them to make their own decisions that perhaps then cause some trauma and pain, then the best thing for you to do is to actually educate them on this work, because when you do the work on the pattern, the pain and trauma is released from the family line. But if there's any secondary ripple, you may still need to speak to your family to educate them how this actually affects them. Same goes for any kind of sidelines, so any sisters, brothers, cousins. When we're working ancestrally, we're working mostly in the direct line of descent. So it's quite unlikely that, something from a sideline will be affecting you. So always just look directly at your grandparents, great-grandparents, etc., etc. If you have been in an adoptive family, and you cannot find anything about your biological family, just work with the adoptive family, because chances are this family actually shaped you beyond your genetics, and you have been plugged in energetically to your adoptive family. So the patterns that are actually working in that family will become your patterns because you are now legally a part of this family. Also, one last thing to indicate is that when you are legally getting married, this, especially when you're changing surname to your spouse's surname, you are also being plugged in to the spouse's family. So if you're looking for the origin of certain patterns, it's worth looking also at your spouse's family. And by the way, sometimes it can even happen in business partnerships. Like I have inherited quite a few patterns from my business partners. So, when you're going into some deep partnership with someone, be careful, because if they haven't done this work, their patterns may also affect you. So this is like a very brief introduction to this massive subject of ancestral patterns. I could talk about it for days. Ancestral healing is actually a massive part of our program Transcending Dimensions that we run every January, because it's one of the biggest layers of deprogramming that we have to do. So if you want some guidance on how to do ancestral healing together with coaching and actually help on how to investigate those patterns, consider joining Transcending Dimensions. We've got a few more spots available. And if you're watching this video after January 2024, we'll be running the next group in January 2025. We'll run one group annually. If you have got also any questions about ancestral healing, please pop them in the comments below. I will either respond to them directly, or I will perhaps make another video to dive deep into another subject if it becomes relevant. Thank you so much for watching. If you are on YouTube, consider subscribing. If you're on iTunes, consider giving us a beautiful review. And stay tuned. The next episode will be more galactic. See you then.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Architects of Destiny podcast. Be sure to subscribe, and we will see you on the next episode.
What would your most abundant life look like? You have to get really intimate and introspective with your own energetic field and with your ancestors and with your soul. The greatest energetic shifts that translate to immediate changes in physical reality come from deactivating and from letting go. It's activating your soul's essence, your highest expression, your most abundant, beautiful timeline means deactivating layers of conditioning, stopping your full potential.